Ken Jennings and Brian Davidson, were almost inseparable when we were kids. We lived close to each other, and my dad and his mom were brother and sister. They were loving brother and sister to each other. My aunt and uncle were friendly and funny, so our families often got together. Although all six cousins were close, three for each family, Ken and I were the closest. As almost always happens, Ken and I eventually grew apart, mostly due to geography, since Ken's family moved 3,000 kilometers away when we were both 11. We were both single for a year. We eventually got used to it and still talked whenever we could. We got together for 3 family reunions before we both headed off to college. While attending college on opposite coasts, we kind of lost touch. Because Ken was still single and had plenty of vacation time saved up, even though he lived 3,000 miles away, he was able to attend my wedding to Carol the year after Carol, and I graduated from college that year. Same year. In fact, he was even one of mine best men and arrived a week before the wedding. It was great to get close to him again. He lived at my parents' house since the wedding took place in the city where we grew up for the first 11 years of our lives, so I often saw him in the days before the wedding. I was sure that Carol was the love of my life. She was pretty, funny, smart, and had no difficult personality traits or problems that I could discern in the 3 years we dated, 2 in college and 1 after. She liked to have a good time, but she was not a persistent flirt and wanted to eventually have children and live behind a picket fence, just like me. Ken and Carol seemed to get along great until our bachelor and bachelorette parties ended every 2 days before the wedding. Ken seemed awkward around her then. Since I had so much to do in the last 2 days before the wedding, I never asked him about it. Unfortunately, things didn't work out for Carol and I. In a situation too trivial to be considered real, after we had been married for 2 years, one day autumn I got a stomach ache at a professional football game on Sunday and left before halftime to go back to our 2-bedroom apartment. I caught her cheating with Jeremy, one of her coworkers I'd dated a couple of times. Since I was already feeling sick, the shock of seeing them brought me to the point where I could tell I was going to throw up. If I weren't so sick, both from my stomach issues and from seeing the love of my life cheating, I might have done some physical damage to one or both of them. Instead, I just collapsed on the floor, wanting to die right then and there. I think I even blacked out for a while, although I did hear some noisy activity and a series of "oh shit," as well as some crying or screaming, which I couldn't distinguish given my state at the time. After an indefinite period of time, my ability to think fully returned, and I stood up. There was no sign of Jeremy or Carol. I took off my clothes, which I also threw up a little on, right in our bedroom, and left them on the floor. I then went to our second bathroom and took a shower, and then climbed into bed in the guest bedroom, again wishing I had died. I was physically and emotionally exhausted and fell asleep at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and didn't wake up until 7 on Monday morning. Even though my stomach was now calm enough for me to work, I called in sick and took the day off because I was emotionally on edge. Luckily, Carol was not home on Monday morning. I moped around for a few hours, collecting some of my clothes and accessories, packing them into a couple of suitcases with the intention of finding another place to live. We only had 6 weeks left on our apartment lease, and obviously I had no intention of renewing it. I would let the landlord know about this as soon as I feel a little better. Around 10 in the morning, my mobile phone rang. The caller ID said this was Tiffany, Carol's bridesmaid at our wedding, and someone I got along well with, although I thought she was immature for a 25-year-old girl. "Brian is listening," was my stellar greeting. Tiffany didn't beat around the bush. "Brian Carroll here, and she feels terrible." "Why is that, Tiff?" I answered. She didn't like being called Tiff, but at that point, any friend of Carol's was my enemy. Well, you know, because of yesterday," she stammered. "What about yesterday? You don't mean she cheated while I was at the football game, do you? She seemed to be enjoying herself, so what was so terrible about it?" Well, Tiff stuttered. She certainly didn't get a degree in public speaking from the College of Justice. She wants to come and talk to you about it, but she's afraid you'll get really angry. Maybe I could come too, she continued. Despite my depression and residual stomach problems, I quickly figured it out. Of course, Tiff. Why don't you and her come on Wednesday evening, say around 7? I really don't want to see her before then, so I hope she can stay with you tonight and Tuesday night. Tiff seemed surprised at my willingness. Okay, let me ask Carol. I heard some muttering in the background, and then Tiff said in a sing-song voice, Great, Brian. We'll see you then, and once again, I'm so sorry, Carol. I ended the call. Now I had to definitely find a new place to live and move out by 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening. I took another shower, ate some white toast so that it would stay in my stomach and not ask for it back, and went to the phone. By 10 that evening, I had rented a small closet, and it contained most of the things I wanted to keep from our marriage, including no wedding photos or any photos of Carol at all. I also had permission to use one of the apartments that my company rented for visiting clients between Wednesday and Sunday, which would give me enough time to find a new place to live. Of course, I have never cleaned up anything at the site of betrayal, including my vomited clothes, but left everything as it was after I threw up on Jeremy and Carol. I went back to work on Tuesday, and although I was physically mostly recovered, emotionally I was a complete mess. However, my female boss, a hard-nosed ass who is really kind at heart, threatened me, so I was surprisingly productive. On Wednesday, I took a half day off to move the rest of my belongings and leave my wedding ring on the kitchen table in my old apartment, as well as meet with a real estate agent who specialized in apartments. She promised to show me several apartments on Saturday and guaranteed that by the end of the day she would be able to find me a suitable new place to live. I turned off my cell phone around 5 p.m. on Wednesday, went to the gym and worked out for 2 hours, pumping more iron in a session than ever before. After my workout, I went to a diner for a light dinner. When I got to my company apartment at 8:30, just out of curiosity, I checked my mobile. 4 missed calls from Tiffany. I laughed and deleted the messages without listening to them. On Monday, I had an appointment with a divorce lawyer. Long story short, I got divorced within 6 months and never had to date Carol again because the shark I hired was able to avoid court-ordered marriage counseling sessions by claiming I was in therapy, which as far as my lawyer knew I was true. However, my therapy was not with a psychologist. In fact, my therapy consisted of me picking up girls in bars almost every Saturday night. Although I was still mostly empty inside after my experience with Carol, the one-night stands were physically satisfying, but weren't worth a penny in terms of my emotional healing. By the time I was divorced, as long as I had been married, my 27-year-old ass had a number of advantages. Firstly, although I have always been in good physical shape, I became a real gym freak. I had a six-pack and the ability to bench press nearly twice my 185-pound weight. I watched my diet and felt better physically than I ever had in my life. Second, I didn't have much of a personal life other than one-night stands, and in a job that was well suited to my talents, I got further and faster than anyone else in the history of the large company I worked for. In fact, almost 3 years after my divorce was final, I received a 6-figure bonus and was on top of the world. Third, since I was not tied to work, I didn't mind traveling for business and was able to see a lot of interesting places, and when my schedule allowed it, I would stay a day or two after finishing business to enjoy the city I was traveling to. I was clearly not ready for a relationship. I have kept in touch with Ken by phone and email over the years. He expressed his condolences over my divorce, but in hindsight, his comments denigrating Carol were a little harsher than they should have been since he had not seen Carol except for the week before and at the wedding. A year after my divorce, second married Audrey. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend, but at that time I absolutely had to be on a business trip to Amsterdam. I sent him and his wife an expensive watch with the words "Happily Ever After" written on it and an engagement photo that he said they loved. I had never seen Audrey in person, but in the photograph she looked like a fox, although I thought her curly blonde hair and excessive makeup took away from her appearance somewhat. Shortly after I received my 6-figure bonus, I had a business trip to a city in the metropolitan area where Ken and Audrey lived. However, following Murphy's Law, Ken himself was on a business trip for the first 3 days of my trip. However, he will return to the city on the last day of my business trip and the day I extend my trip. We agreed to meet at his house for dinner on Friday night that week, and for me to spend the day with him and Audrey on Saturday before flying home on Sunday. I arrived in the Keena metropolitan area early Monday afternoon, ahead of my first business meeting on Tuesday morning. I hadn't been in a relationship for a while and was expecting top-notch girls in the area since there were several million people living there. The doorman Tim at the fancy hotel I was staying at was particularly friendly, and we struck up a conversation. I love interacting with real locals in any place I visit. I arrived at the wrong time, and we actually chatted for about 10 minutes. At the end, he said with a smile, "If you need some friendly interaction during your stay at a business dinner or something like that, let me know." I was absolutely sure that I knew what it meant. I saw Tim the next morning and was honest with him. "Tim, I would really like to have a loving companion. Any suggestions?" I winked at him and slipped him a $50 bill. When he saw the face of Ulysses S. Grant staring back at him, a pale smile appeared on his face. He pulled out a card with a name, Kitty, on it, and a phone number printed in a flowy font and nothing else. "She is married, works part-time, is independent, and the only one I can really recommend. If it is not available, I can give you local service numbers." I thanked him and got into the taxi he called for me. I didn't waste any time. The 15-minute drive to my meeting place, I agreed to meet Kitty at my hotel for a drink at 8 p.m. and, if we were both up to it, maybe have a nice time afterwards. She was expensive, but since I had the opportunity to chat with her over a couple of drinks and an appearance fee before making a decision, I was on board. Kitty was unlike any girl I had used before. Her shiny dark hair was slicked back and, other than a hint of lipstick, she wore no makeup. Also, her dress was completely understated. I immediately recognized her by her white carnation. Despite the conservative nature of her dress, it did not hide her magnificent figure. I walked up to her and introduced myself as John Smith, the fictitious name I had given her over the phone, and which she obviously knew was fake, and we sat down at a table in the hotel bar. Kitty was attractive, and within 5 minutes I knew she had that factor. Within 20 minutes, I had slipped $900 in cash under her desk. I gave her a $100 bill the first time I shook her hand. The hotel gym had lockers controlled by guest-specific codes, and she placed her purse and its contents in the locker after discreetly removing her protective equipment. I chuckled to myself. I wonder what she expected from me. Before putting her cell phone in her locker, she told me that she needed to make a private call. I assumed it was her husband based on what Tim told me, even though we didn't talk about her marriage while we were drinking. I gave her the key card to my room and went upstairs to 924. Kitty arrived at 924 15 minutes after me. I had a drink from the minibar in my hand and another on the table for her. She smiled and took a sip of her drink. A significant addition to her recognizable strengths was her conversation. Her conversation was not difficult. It was fun and interesting at the same time. I probably enjoyed this more than any other bed conversation I've ever had in my entire life. The next morning, we had a good laugh at breakfast. She devoured blueberry pancakes as if she were a truck driver who had been on the road for 12 hours straight. My teasing about this made her smile mischievously. I liked Kitty so much that I did something unprecedented. I asked her to repeat it that evening. "If you invite me to dinner and dancing, I'll only charge you $500, she giggled. "I really enjoyed it last night." "Agreed," I quickly answered. "You can come at 18:30 and reserve a table in any restaurant you want." My dinner and dance date on Wednesday night couldn't have gone better. By 19, I no longer remembered that I was with a married call girl. It was almost like a romantic date. Of course, at breakfast on Thursday morning, I asked her if she could spend the night again on Thursday. "Yes, let's have a quick dinner, watch a short film, and then get down to business," she smiled. This is what we did, only we didn't watch the whole movie. Thursday night was something I thought I could only dream about, not something that would actually become a reality. Kitty has outdone herself. She took everything to the next level. However, at breakfast on Friday morning, I was in shock. This was the first woman after my divorce with whom I wanted a long-term relationship, and she was not only married, but also a call girl. Kitty also seemed to be in a thoughtful state. After about 10 minutes of silence at breakfast, she moaned, "I wish this could go on for months. Unfortunately, my husband will be home tonight, and I will have to turn into Susie the housewife." "Kitty, I could fall in love with you," came spontaneously from my lips, straight from my heart, before I knew I was going to say it or could stop it. When I said this, a forlorn expression appeared on her face, and then she seemed to come to her senses and muttered with tears in her eyes, "Please don't call me if you come back to town. My life is already too complicated." Then she stood up abruptly and left, leaving 2 pancakes on the plate. Despite my anxiety and self-pity, I was a tiger in the final meetings on Friday, and by the time I went to Ken's house around 5 o'clock, I had achieved everything I wanted during the trip. When I reported to my boss, the same one who, figuratively speaking, gave me a kick in the ass when I caught Carol cheating. Every time she got promoted, I did too. She was delighted. "Spend your bonus evening or two in company," were her last encouraging words. By the time the taxi dropped me off at their 3-bedroom Gothic-style country house, I had suppressed my self-pity that the woman I could have easily loved was unavailable and was looking forward to meeting Ken and Audrey. Ken greeted me enthusiastically at the door with a manly hug and a pat on the back. "Wow, you look better than I've ever seen you," he blurted out. "I also feel better than ever," I blurted out in response. "Sorry, but it looks like you could use a few pounds," I chuckled, pointing my finger at his protruding, although not large, belly. "Audrey cooks too well, and I can't tear myself away from the table." "Come and meet her," he said. Fortunately, neither Audrey nor I had anything in our hands that was sure to fall out when we saw each other in the corridor between the kitchen and the hallway. Ken had already relieved me of the 1 5-liter bottle of Magnum wine and bouquet of flowers I had brought. Audrey was drumroll Kitty. Apparently noticing my slack jaw, Ken asked, "What happened, Brian?" Thinking faster than I ever had in my life, I blurted out, "The only photo I saw of Audrey had curly blonde hair and heavy makeup, but now she has straight brown hair and light makeup. I would never have recognized her." Apparently, Audrey is smart too, because by the time I finished my comment, her expression had changed from shock to smiling, and she purred, "Well, Kanu, I like my natural hair color better, and he says I don't need makeup to look amazing." "I have to agree with him," I replied casually, taking her hand and kissing it. Considering the circumstances, the dinner went as well as could be. I was on autopilot, and apparently so was Audrey. It helped that the wine in the Magnum bottle I bought was Ken's favorite wine, and he drank almost the entire 1.5 liters. Neither Audrey nor I were interested in getting drunk for fear of what might come out of our mouths. When Ken was in the bathroom, Audrey came up to me and said, "Please don't tell Ken." I hesitated and then answered, "I'm not sure I can promise that. If I were him, I'd like to know. Let me share some information with you before you make a decision. Give me 5 minutes tonight or tomorrow, and I think you will have a different point of view," she replied. When I hesitated, she said, "Please, just do a favor for the one you called your best lover in the world in the middle of the night." I didn't remember saying that, but it was certainly true. There were many times during my interaction with Kitty Audrey when I thought this way. "Okay, we'll find time to talk." Luckily, Ken made it easy for us to find time to talk. An hour after dinner, he insisted that I spend the night with him on Friday and Saturday. Audrey convinced him that he was too tired to drive and that she would drive me to and from the hotel, taking the time to get to know me. Ken was delighted with this scenario. When Audrey dropped me off at the hotel, she didn't hesitate to say she was right. "I'm only telling you this because I'm not in a position to get a divorce right now, and Ken feels very guilty about what he did to you. I'm betraying his trust by telling you." "What did you say?" I asked, truly puzzled. Audrey went into a long explanation of all the details related to her story about Ken. This took almost the entire 25-minute drive to the hotel. The gist is that the day after the bachelor and bachelorette party, which was also the day before the wedding, Ken overheard Carol's two bridesmaids talking when they didn't know he was around. They were apparently stunned that Carol had cheated on me at her bachelorette party and then arranged to meet him when she returned from her honeymoon. When Audrey asked why Ken didn't tell me about this before the wedding, especially since he perfectly understood that fidelity was important to me, he simply brushed her off and said, "It's not my problem, and I didn't want him to kill the messenger." Years later, he felt bad about it, but he swore he would never, ever tell me about it, even during or after my divorce. The details of Audrey's story fit perfectly with the time, place, and events surrounding my wedding to Carol, and I had no doubt that it was true. This certainly explained why Ken's reaction to Carol changed shortly before the wedding and why he was so persistent in telling me good riddance when we talked on the phone during my divorce process. When I collected all my clothes and documents from the hotel and checked out, I thought about nothing else except Brian, Ken, and Audrey's relationships and my past with Carol. If I had known what Ken did at that time, I would have called off the wedding. It would have saved me from wasting 3 years of my life. One good thing was that my mind was clear when I slept with Audrey. By the time I got back to Audrey's car, I had decided never to tell Ken about Audrey's side business as Kitty. As soon as I plopped down in the passenger seat, I informed Audrey of my decision. This brought a smile from her and a passionate kiss. By this time, I felt comfortable enough with Audrey to ask her about her side business. "Why do you work as a call girl?" I boldly asked her. "You can tell me to mind my own business, and I'll never bring it up again, but my mind thirsts for this information like a man in the desert thirsts for water." "I'll tell you," she giggled, and then did it. Like the story of Ken's betrayal of me, this story was long, complicated, detailed, and nuanced. The bottom line is that Ken basically sabotaged her career, insisted that she be a housewife, even though they had no children, and he had no intention of having any, contrary to what he told her before they got married, and lost most of the desire for sex. She worked as a call girl to earn enough money to end her marriage with dignity. Although by the time we got back to their house, I didn't approve, at least I understood her point of view. When we got inside, Ken had already fallen into a wine-induced sleep. After Audrey left their bedroom with this information, she showed me the guest bedroom. I blocked the door when she was about to leave. "I really need something to help me sleep," I chuckled, and Kenna is in himself. On Saturday, the three of us did some sightseeing in the city, had lunch at a famous restaurant in the main city park, and generally enjoyed ourselves. In the late afternoon, Audrey and I went to her health club to work out. Ken had never been much of an exerciser, and I was impressed by her daily routine. After the shower, we headed out for dinner and then some drinks. Ken got drunk again, so Audrey and I had some more fun. On Sunday, Ken wanted to watch football. I wasn't as big an NFL fan as I was before I came home from the game and caught Carol cheating, so Audrey volunteered to drive me to the airport. On the way, we had a frank conversation. "I really like you, Brian," she began the conversation. "Not only sex, you are an interesting and funny guy. What do you think?" After a long pause, I decided to be honest. As I already blurted out once, I could fall in love with you. However, I'm going to try to forget you. I don't like the idea of termination of your marriage to my cousin, despite how meanly he treated me by not informing me of Carol's real character. And while I certainly took advantage of it, I'm not sure I could have passed you by if you weren't a call girl. That's fair enough, and I understand. However, I have a lot to think about. I'm going to divorce Ken anyway, and I've already lost my taste for being a call girl after my short affair with you. So I quit. How about we just stay in touch? I will allow you to control the pace and nature of our future communication. Are you okay with that, Brian? I didn't have to pause in response to this. "Sounds like a plan," I chuckled. I would like to sew off her, but the memories of how good we were did not allow me to do this. Over the next year, I visited Ken and Audrey's town 3 times, twice for business and once just to see Audrey. I never told Ken that I would be in town during any of my visits and only spent time with Audrey. Audrey was so sultry, funny, smart, and interesting that I had a really hard time convincing myself that I wasn't in love with her. Sex with her ruined me for other women, and for the next year, the only time I had sex with anyone other than her was when I was depressed after a phone call with her and picked up a girl at a bar who was somewhat similar to her. It's been about 380 days, not that I'm counting, since I first met Audrey when the receptionist in the main lobby of our building called around 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. You have a female visitor. She says her name is Kitty. Should I send her upstairs? What the hell? Flashed through my head. Apparently, I was speechless for a long time because the administrator asked, "Are you here, Mr. Schuss Davidson?" I replied, "Oh, sorry, Monique. I'll go down now to take her upstairs." Because we were in a public place, Audrey and I didn't kiss when I met her in the lobby, but we did give each other a quick hug. "What brings you to town, Audrey?" I asked as we took the elevator to my office. "I have some news that I want to share with you, and then talk seriously about our relationship," she smiled. "I'll show you my office and introduce you to my boss. Then at 5:30 p.m. or so we can go out to dinner and then talk at my apartment. How does this sound? We can also deliver your luggage to my apartment." "Fine, and I won't stop you from doing the work you need, but I hope you don't mind if I stay for the weekend," she answered. We waited until dinner was over, and we walked around a nearby small lake before Audrey and I went to my apartment, and she said what was on her mind. She did not mince words. "Here is a copy of my divorce decree," she said, handing me a paper from the small suitcase that she carried with her throughout the day. I quickly scanned it. It was what she imagined and dated 3 days earlier. As soon as I pulled away from him, she handed over several other papers. "This is a sonogram of our baby growing in my belly, a little girl, as well as a prenatal non-invasive DNA test taken earlier this week that shows you are her father." I gulped as I looked through these documents. I was going to ask how she got my DNA, but then I realized how ridiculous it was to ask. These documents also turned out to be what she said they were. And again, as soon as I took my eyes off them, my mouth suddenly went dry. She handed me another document. "This is a proposed prenuptial agreement that states that if we get married, and if I then ever have sex of any type with any other person other than you, I will only leave the marriage with my clothes, jewelry, and any car I bring into the marriage. Marriage and $5 and nothing more, and that I will not challenge custody of our child or children." It was too much, but my mouth was so dry that I didn't think I could respond verbally and be understood. So I just read the document. Again, everything was exactly as she described. When I looked up again, she continued, "There is no way I can prove with certainty that I am no longer a call girl, but I have signed an affidavit to that effect, which states that if you ever prove otherwise, that I have had sex with anyone other than you or Ken for the last year, I will pay you $25,000. I also have an affidavit from Tim, the doorman who put you in touch with me, that I told him I was no longer available and that he hasn't mentioned my name to anyone else in the last year." She held out 2 more sheets. As my mouth became even more dry, I read the 2 affidavits. Again, they were exactly as she imagined them to be. "Finally, I talked to your mother. I met her at my wedding to Ken, and we seemed to hit it off. I've talked to her on the phone and exchanged emails over the years. I didn't tell her much about our relationship, but I asked her what difficulties would arise for her and your father if I left Ken and you and I somehow got along. I don't have her affidavit, but you can confirm with her that she doesn't object, even though it would probably prevent another full family reunion." After this last statement, a forced smile appeared on her face. I don't know what to say." Finally, stuttering, I squeezed out, "You need time to think. Let's go to bed. You'll think about it and share your thoughts with me, no matter how long it takes. Maybe even by the end of the weekend." For the rest of the weekend, nothing more was said about any of the issues she raised or the documents she showed me. There were 2 reasons for this. The first was that she wanted to give me space and time to think without any pressure or arguments. Second, my brain had so many endorphins churning like the Amazon in the rainy season that there was little chance that I would be able to truly think. And, since I obviously didn't have a chance to think things through by Monday, I invited Audrey to stay at my apartment while I was leaving for work and relax. It took me 2 weeks before I came to a firm decision on the issues raised by Audrey. During this time, Audrey never pressured me at all or even mentioned it. What finally made me decide was the joy of having someone to come home to and share my day with. Having a constant, cheerful life partner is the most important thing. 2 weeks after Audrey's arrival, when we were walking around the same small lake as on the first evening of her arrival, halfway there I got down on my knee and pulled out a ruby engagement ring. I knew that she wanted something completely different from the diamond one she returned after the divorce and asked her to marry me. She pretended to think it over before answering, but as soon as I started tickling her, she said yes. She signed the marriage contract she had prepared. I talked to my parents and even my aunt and uncle, Ken's parents, and then we got married in a small ceremony 3 weeks after I proposed. That was 5 years ago, and I added 2 more children, just 2 girls and a boy. These were the 5 happiest years of my life. My reality of falling in love with my cousin's wife while she was working as a call girl after leaving my first wife for cheating on me and then eventually entering into a monogamous happy marriage with her is strange. Then fiction. However, I don't think about it too much. I'm just enjoying life. Ken and I haven't spoken since we got married. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to the next one.